Long before your eyes adjust to the darkness, the sea has already awakened. Every night begins the same way, with the sound of waves striking unforgiving rocks hundreds of feet below the towering lighthouse where you have lived for years. Unlike the bustling streets of Rome, where merchants shout before sunrise and soldiers march through crowded forums, your world is ruled by silence, broken only by wind, gulls, and the endless breathing of the Mediterranean Sea. You rise long before the first hint of dawn, climbing the narrow spiral staircase that circles endlessly inside the lighthouse tower. Each worn stone step has been shaped smooth by generations of keepers who walked exactly where you now place your feet. They climbed these same stairs carrying heavy oil jars, replacement wicks, bundles of firewood, and the quiet burden of knowing that one forgotten task could cost dozens of sailors their lives before morning. As you reach the lantern chamber at the top, yesterday's fire has nearly died, leaving only faint glowing embers beneath blackened iron grates. Your first responsibility is never glamorous. You scrape away thick layers of soot coating the bronze reflector, trim the charred remains of the enormous wick, refill the heavy basin with precious olive oil, and carefully polish every piece of polished metal that helps carry the light across the dark sea. No emperor will ever visit to admire this work. No poet will write verses about a spotless lantern. Yet every sailor approaching the coast depends upon details so small that most people would never even notice them. A single smudge of soot can weaken the light. A poorly trimmed wick can fill the chamber with smoke. An empty oil basin can transform the lighthouse from a guardian into a useless stone tower standing silently above disaster. When the eastern sky slowly begins changing from black to deep blue, you finally step onto the narrow balcony circling the top of the lighthouse. Cold sea wind immediately pulls at your heavy wool cloak while salty mist settles across your face. Far below, waves explode against jagged cliffs with enough force to shake the ancient stone foundations beneath your feet. Looking toward the horizon, dozens of tiny merchant ships slowly emerge from the darkness as silhouettes drifting across silver water. Some carry grain from Egypt destined to feed Rome itself. Others transport marble from Greece, olive oil from Hispania, glass from Syria, or wine from Gaul. Each vessel represents months of labor, fortunes invested by wealthy merchants, and hundreds of lives depending entirely upon a safe arrival. Yet to every captain sailing through darkness, your lighthouse is more important than any cargo hidden below deck. Long before sailors recognize temples, harbors, or city walls, they search the horizon for a single flame standing against the night. That lonely light tells them where deadly rocks wait beneath invisible waves. It tells exhausted crews they have survived another crossing. It tells frightened travelers that civilization lies just ahead beyond the darkness. You often wonder whether the people aboard those ships ever think about the man tending the fire above the cliffs. Probably not. They simply see the light and continue safely home. Perhaps that is enough. The greatest success for a lighthouse keeper is remaining completely unnoticed. If everyone reaches harbor safely, no one remembers the flame that guided them there. Only when the light disappears does the world suddenly remember it ever existed. Your morning continues with work that never truly ends. The tower itself demands constant attention. Salt carried by sea winds slowly eats away at iron hinges and bronze fittings. Rainwater slips through tiny cracks between ancient stones. Wooden doors swell during winter storms before shrinking beneath the relentless summer sun. Every rope, pulley, ladder, window shutter, and storage chest must be inspected almost daily, because there is rarely anyone else available to repair them if they fail. You are not simply a keeper of light. You are a carpenter, mason, blacksmith, cleaner, watchman, navigator, and caretaker of one of Rome's most important coastal structures. The empire spends enormous fortunes constructing harbors and lighthouses, but maintaining them falls upon ordinary men like yourself whose names never appear inside official records. Sometimes passing officials arrive to inspect the lighthouse, carefully recording measurements and supplies before sailing away a few hours later. They compliment the tower's excellent condition, praise its reliability, and report everything to distant administrators. None of those reports include your name. They simply state that the lighthouse continues functioning as expected. You have grown accustomed to such invisibility. Stone towers receive admiration. Fires receive praise. The man climbing hundreds of stairs every single day simply becomes part of the building itself. By midday, bright sunlight transforms the sea into a vast field of glittering silver stretching endlessly toward distant horizons where sky and water merge into one another. During calm afternoons like this, the Mediterranean seems almost peaceful enough to forget its reputation for sudden violence. Fishing boats drift lazily along the coastline while dolphins occasionally leap beside merchant vessels continuing north toward Rome. From your position high above the cliffs, you observe a world few people ever witness. You see storms forming hours before they reach shore. You notice ships long before harbor masters recognize them. You watch seabirds suddenly change direction, warning of weather still hidden beyond the horizon. Years spent inside the lighthouse have taught you to read the sea almost like another language. Tiny changes in wave patterns, cloud shapes, wind direction, and the behavior of birds often reveal tomorrow's conditions long before anyone else realizes danger approaches. Sailors trust the sea because they must. You respect it because you understand it never truly belongs to anyone. The Mediterranean offers wealth beyond imagination to those fortunate enough to cross it safely. Yet it has claimed countless ships without warning, swallowing merchants, soldiers, fishermen, and entire families beneath waters that appear perfectly calm only moments before disaster strikes. Every lighthouse keeper learns the same difficult lesson. The sea never becomes your friend. At best, it merely allows you to survive another day. As evening slowly approaches, preparations begin for the most important hours of your entire profession. Throughout the afternoon, you carry basket after basket of dry firewood up the endless staircase, each load growing heavier as exhaustion settles into your shoulders. Large clay jars filled with fresh olive oil wait beside the lantern chamber, carefully measured to ensure the flame burns without interruption until sunrise. Every piece of equipment receives one final inspection before darkness falls. Outside, the horizon gradually turns brilliant shades of orange and crimson while the first merchant ships begin adjusting course toward the safety of nearby harbors. Far below, fishermen pull their boats ashore before the night tide rises. One by one, the sounds of daytime slowly disappear until only the wind and distant surf remain. Then, just as the final edge of the sun slips beneath the western sea, you kneel beside the great bronze lantern, strike flint against steel, and watch a tiny spark become a flickering flame. Within moments, the fire grows brighter, illuminating the polished reflector until a powerful beam of golden light stretches across the darkening Mediterranean. Somewhere beyond the horizon, sailors who will never know your face quietly breathe easier as they recognize the familiar glow standing faithfully above the cliffs once again. Night has begun. Your longest hours are only just beginning. The rest of the world prepares to sleep while your lonely watch over Rome's restless sea has only now truly started. The first true lesson of becoming a Roman lighthouse keeper is learning that your life no longer belongs to the rhythm of ordinary people. While fishermen return home before sunset and merchants close their market stalls as darkness approaches, your real work begins only after the rest of the world has gone to sleep. Every evening, long before the sky loses its final golden colors, you begin climbing the endless spiral staircase carrying heavy jars of olive oil balanced carefully across your shoulders. The climb is slow and exhausting. Hundreds of worn stone steps twist upward inside the narrow tower, illuminated only by small oil lamps fixed to the walls. The staircase seems almost endless, and by the time you reach the lantern chamber at the summit, your legs already ache before the night's work has even begun. Yet there is no room for complaint. The enormous bronze basin holding the lighthouse flame must remain completely full throughout the night. If the fire weakens for even a short time, sailors navigating dangerous waters could mistake the coastline, drift toward hidden reefs, or crash against the unforgiving cliffs beneath the tower. Every drop of oil you carry has the potential to save lives. Looking out from the narrow balcony surrounding the lantern room, you watch the final merchant ships hurrying toward distant harbors before darkness consumes the horizon. Their white sails glow briefly beneath the setting sun before gradually disappearing into the growing twilight. Somewhere aboard those vessels, tired sailors search the coastline, waiting for your light to appear. They have never met you. They never will. Yet they trust you completely without even knowing your name. That quiet trust becomes the heaviest responsibility you will ever carry. As the sun finally sinks beneath the Mediterranean, you strike flint against steel, and within moments the great flame roars to life, reflected brilliantly by polished bronze mirrors that cast its light miles across the sea. Instantly, your lonely tower transforms from silent stone into a beacon visible far beyond the horizon. The darkness surrounding you grows deeper with every passing minute, yet the fire beside you burns brighter than ever. Outside, stars slowly emerge above the restless sea, while cold winds begin circling the tower with increasing strength. Every hour throughout the night, you inspect the flame, trim the giant wick, wipe soot from the reflector, and carefully add more oil before the fire begins to weaken. There is never an opportunity to sleep. Even the smallest mistake can become catastrophic before sunrise. Sometimes thick fog rolls across the coastline so suddenly that the lighthouse almost disappears inside its own cloud. On those nights you strain your ears, listening for distant ship bells echoing through the mist. Experienced captains answer the lighthouse by sounding bronze horns, allowing both sailor and keeper to know the other still survives within the darkness. It becomes a strange conversation carried entirely through light and sound across invisible water. During calmer hours, you often lean against the cold stone wall, watching moonlight dance across endless waves. Dolphins occasionally surface beside passing ships, while seabirds circle silently through silver skies before disappearing toward hidden cliffs where they nest. From so high above the sea, the world seems peaceful, almost timeless. Yet beneath that beauty lies constant danger. You have personally witnessed storms appear without warning, transforming calm water into towering walls of black waves within a single hour. You have seen merchant ships vanish into darkness after one terrible mistake. You have watched broken masts wash ashore days later with no survivors ever found. Those memories never truly leave a lighthouse keeper. Every night they return quietly, reminding you why the flame must never be allowed to fade. Around midnight, the temperature falls sharply. Sea wind cuts through even the thickest wool cloak, carrying salty mist that settles across every surface inside the lantern chamber. Bronze slowly becomes slippery beneath your hands, while ropes and pulleys stiffen from moisture. You continue working despite numb fingers because the fire cannot wait for comfort. Looking toward the horizon, you eventually notice another tiny light flickering far away upon the sea. Another lighthouse. Another lonely keeper standing watch just as you are, separated by many miles of coastline yet connected by the same silent duty. Together, your lights guide countless strangers safely home without either of you ever receiving thanks. That realization somehow makes the loneliness easier to endure. You are never truly alone. Across the vast coastline of the Roman Empire, dozens of other keepers climb their own spiral staircases tonight, refill their own oil basins, trim their own burning wicks, and stare into the same endless darkness, hoping every ship reaches morning. Long before dawn finally approaches, exhaustion settles deep into your bones, but the sea remains awake, the fire continues burning, and your watch is far from over. Only when the first pale light of sunrise slowly begins replacing the stars do you finally allow yourself one long breath of relief. Another night has passed. Another 100 lives may have reached harbor safely because one forgotten man refused to let a single flame die. By the second week of your assignment, you begin realizing that the greatest enemy of a Roman lighthouse keeper is not the sea itself but repetition. Every sunrise looks similar from the top of the tower. Every staircase contains the same worn stones. Every oil jar weighs exactly as much as the last. And every evening ends with another lonely climb toward the lantern chamber. Many people believe danger is what makes this profession difficult, yet the truth is far quieter. It is the endless routine that slowly wears away at the spirit. Day after day, you repeat the same careful movements with absolute precision because one careless moment could erase years of perfect service. As dawn breaks across the Mediterranean, the enormous flame that protected ships throughout the night finally begins to fade. You carefully reduce the wick, extinguish the remaining fire, and immediately begin cleaning the lantern before soot hardens against the polished bronze mirrors. Thick black smoke has coated every surface during the long night, and each reflector must shine like gold before evening returns. You spend hours wiping away layers of ash until your hands become stained black despite repeated washing. Every polished surface increases the reach of tonight's light by another few precious meters across the sea. Few people ever think about such details, yet sailors navigating dangerous coastlines depend upon them without realizing it. Once the lantern is cleaned, the real labor begins. Heavy clay jars must be refilled with fresh olive oil delivered from nearby villages. Firewood must be carried from storage sheds to the upper floors before unexpected storms arrive. Rainwater collected inside large stone cisterns must be checked because every keeper knows that fresh water becomes more valuable than gold when supply ships are delayed by bad weather. The lighthouse is more than a tower. It is an isolated world that must sustain itself regardless of what happens beyond the cliffs. During the afternoon, a small merchant vessel anchors below the lighthouse to deliver supplies. The captain climbs the steep stone path carrying official documents confirming the shipment while several laborers unload barrels, ropes, fresh lamp wicks, dried food, and replacement tools. For a brief time, the lonely tower feels alive with conversation. The sailors eagerly ask whether storms have appeared farther along the coast, while you question them about conditions in distant ports. They tell stories of bustling harbors in Alexandria, crowded markets in Carthage, and enormous grain fleets sailing toward Rome. Listening to them reminds you how small your world has become. Months sometimes pass without leaving the lighthouse. While the empire expands across continents, your entire existence revolves around one narrow staircase and one endless stretch of coastline. Yet strangely, you no longer envy the travelers. Every departing ship carries uncertainty. Every returning vessel brings news of pirates, disease, storms, and war. The lighthouse remains constant while the rest of the world endlessly changes around it. After the supply boat disappears beyond the horizon, silence returns almost immediately. The only remaining sound is the wind pushing steadily against the stone tower as gulls circle overhead searching for fish. You spend the remaining daylight inspecting every section of the structure. Tiny cracks appearing between ancient stones must be repaired before winter rains widen them. Rust forming around iron hinges must be scraped away before salt water destroys the metal completely. Wooden shutters protecting the lantern windows require fresh oil, so they continue opening smoothly during violent storms. Every repair feels insignificant on its own, yet together they preserve the tower that countless sailors trust with their lives. As evening approaches once again, clouds begin gathering over the western horizon. Experience tells you they are different from ordinary summer clouds. Their lower edges appear unusually dark, while distant flashes of lightning briefly illuminate the sky beyond the sea. No thunder reaches the lighthouse yet, but you already know what tomorrow may bring. Before lighting tonight's flame, you double the amount of prepared firewood beside the lantern and fill extra oil basins as a precaution. Experienced keepers never wait for storms to arrive before preparing. They prepare while the sky still appears calm. As darkness slowly covers the Mediterranean once more, you ignite the great beacon exactly as you have done countless times before. The brilliant golden light stretches across the growing darkness while the first distant rumble of thunder finally reaches the cliffs beneath your feet. Somewhere beyond the horizon, ships continue sailing directly toward the storm without yet realizing what awaits them. Only you, standing high above the sea beside the lonely flame, can already see tomorrow beginning before anyone else. Just before midnight, the storm finally arrives. All afternoon you had watched dark clouds gathering beyond the western horizon, moving steadily across the sea like an advancing army. But now there is no longer any doubt. The calm Mediterranean that shimmered beneath the afternoon sun has transformed into a restless black expanse, its surface torn apart by violent winds that howl around the lighthouse with terrifying force. Rain crashes against the stone tower so fiercely that it feels as though the sea itself is trying to climb the cliffs. Every few seconds, lightning tears open the sky, illuminating enormous waves exploding against the rocks hundreds of feet below before plunging everything back into darkness. From the lantern chamber, you grip the cold bronze railing as the entire tower vibrates beneath the relentless assault of wind and water. It was built by Rome's finest engineers to survive storms exactly like this. Yet standing inside it while nature unleashes its full strength makes even the strongest stone seem fragile. There is no possibility of rest tonight. Every few minutes you inspect the great flame, adding more oil as violent gusts force smoke back into the lantern chamber. The polished bronze reflector quickly becomes coated with soot, reducing the reach of the light just when frightened sailors need it most. Again and again you wipe the mirror clean while rainwater leaks through tiny gaps around the lantern windows, dripping onto the stone floor beneath your feet. Your wool cloak became soaked hours ago, but you barely notice anymore. The cold has settled so deeply into your body that it feels almost ordinary. Suddenly, between flashes of lightning, you notice something that immediately sends a chill through your chest. Far out across the sea, a faint light appears and disappears between towering waves. It is not another lighthouse. It moves with the water. A ship. Even from this distance you can tell it is struggling. Each flash of lightning reveals the vessel climbing enormous waves before vanishing inside deep valleys of black water. Sometimes you lose sight of it entirely, only for another bolt of lightning to reveal it again, drifting dangerously close toward the rocky coastline beneath the lighthouse. You know there is nothing you can physically do. No rescue boat could survive these waves. No rope is long enough to reach them. The only weapon you possess against the storm is the great fire burning behind you. Without hesitation, you feed more oil into the basin, increasing the brightness of the flame until the lantern chamber glows like molten gold. Every polished mirror is adjusted by hand to throw as much light as possible across the raging sea. Your arms ache from turning the heavy bronze mechanisms, yet you continue working because somewhere out there terrified sailors are searching desperately through rain and darkness for exactly this light. Minutes feel like hours as you watch the tiny vessel fight for survival. Then, at last, its course begins to change. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ship turns away from the deadly cliffs and angles towards safer waters farther south. You cannot hear the captain shouting commands above the wind, but you imagine the relief spreading across the exhausted crew as they finally recognize the lighthouse through sheets of rain. They will never know your face. They will never learn your name. By tomorrow morning, they may simply remember surviving a terrible storm. Yet you will always remember the tiny light that almost disappeared forever beyond the waves. Long after the danger passes, the storm continues raging until the final hours before dawn. Broken branches litter the cliffs below while enormous waves continue hammering the rocks with enough force to shake dust from the ancient stones surrounding the lantern chamber. When the first pale light of morning finally appears beneath the storm clouds, the wind gradually begins losing its strength. Rain slows to a gentle drizzle, and the sea, though still rough, no longer looks intent on destroying everything before it. Exhausted beyond words, you step onto the narrow balcony circling the lighthouse and breathe deeply as fresh, salty air fills your lungs. The coastline bears fresh scars from the night's violence. Sections of the cliff have collapsed into the sea. Driftwood, broken barrels, torn fishing nets, and pieces of shattered boats now cover the shoreline below. Yet standing proudly above it all, the lighthouse remains exactly where it has stood for generations. Weathered, soaked, blackened by smoke, but still standing. As sunlight finally breaks through the retreating clouds, you notice several merchant ships safely sailing along the distant horizon, continuing journeys that might never have reached another sunrise without the lonely flame you protected throughout the longest night of your life. At that moment, you finally understand why lighthouse keepers never measure success by comfort or recognition. Success is counted in ships that never crash, sailors who never drown, and families who never receive news that their loved ones were lost at sea. Most people will never know how close disaster came during the night, and perhaps that is the greatest reward your profession can ever offer. When the storm finally passes, the sea never truly returns to the way it was before. Every experienced lighthouse keeper knows this. Violent weather leaves invisible wounds that cannot be seen from the top of the tower. Hidden reefs shift beneath enormous waves. Sandbars move into unfamiliar places. Floating debris drifts silently beneath the surface. And damaged ships continue struggling long after the skies have cleared. For that reason, the days following a great storm are often more dangerous than the storm itself. Before sunrise, you descend the endless spiral staircase carrying a small leather satchel filled with simple tools, rope, fresh water, and dried bread. Today is one of the rare occasions when you must leave the lighthouse itself. The tower cannot simply stand above the sea forever without someone inspecting the coastline below. Every path leading toward the cliffs has become slippery with rain, while loose stones continue falling from weakened rock faces. The air smells different after the storm, fresh, salty, and filled with the scent of wet earth carried from distant hills. Reaching the shoreline, you immediately begin discovering evidence of the night's violence. Broken fishing boats lie scattered across the rocks like abandoned toys. Torn sails flutter weakly between jagged stones. Wooden barrels stamped with merchant seals from Alexandria, Hispania, and Carthage have washed ashore alongside shattered crates filled with soaked grain and ruined pottery. The sea always keeps most of what it claims, but every storm returns a few silent reminders of its power. As you continue walking along the coastline, you notice something unusual caught between two large rocks. At first you assume it is another broken mast, but as you move closer, you realize it is a small lifeboat turned upside down. Carefully pushing it aside, you discover signs that someone survived the wreck. Footprints remain visible in the wet sand, leading away from the beach toward the cliffs before disappearing among patches of grass. Following them for several minutes, you eventually find an exhausted young sailor sitting beneath a rocky overhang wrapped in a torn blanket. His face is pale from exhaustion, his hands tremble uncontrollably, and dried salt covers his skin after spending hours fighting the sea. He barely manages to speak, yet the relief in his eyes says more than words ever could. You offer him fresh water and help him slowly climb the steep path toward the lighthouse, where warmth, food, and shelter await. Throughout the afternoon, he gradually regains enough strength to tell his story. His merchant vessel had sailed directly into the storm shortly after sunset. One enormous wave snapped the main mast in half, leaving the ship powerless as wind and currents drove it toward the cliffs. Amid complete darkness, the only thing the captain could see was your lighthouse. Again and again, the crew adjusted their course using that single flame as their guide, hoping to avoid the rocks hidden beneath the crashing waves. They almost succeeded. Just before reaching safer water, another wave shattered the ship beyond repair. Most of the crew escaped aboard small boats, though no one knows exactly how many survived. The young sailor pauses before quietly thanking you. Without that light, he whispers, none of us would have known where the cliffs ended and hope began. His words remain with you long after the conversation ends. During countless lonely nights, you had often questioned whether anyone truly noticed your work. Now, sitting across from one man whose life may have depended upon a flame you tended through exhaustion and freezing rain, you finally receive the answer. The lighthouse was never simply a building. To those lost upon the sea, it was hope itself made visible. As evening approaches once again, the rescued sailor departs with a passing fishing boat bound for the nearest harbor, promising never to forget the keeper who welcomed him after the storm. Soon the familiar silence returns to the cliffs. You once again begin carrying heavy oil jars up the endless staircase, trimming fresh wicks, polishing bronze mirrors, and preparing another night's beacon. Nothing about the routine has changed, yet everything feels slightly different. Somewhere beyond the horizon, families will embrace sailors who survived because they found the lighthouse before the rocks found them. Those families will never know your name. Their gratitude will never reach the lonely tower standing above the sea. But as darkness slowly blankets the Mediterranean once more and the great flame rises into the night sky, you realize that perhaps recognition has never been the purpose of your work. The light itself is enough. Every ship that safely changes course, every sailor who returns home, and every child who sees a father walk through the door again becomes another quiet reminder that even the loneliest life can illuminate countless others without ever standing in the spotlight. As the days pass, you begin measuring time not by calendars or festivals, but by the changing moods of the sea itself. Every sunrise paints the Mediterranean with different colors. Every evening brings a different wind, and every night writes a new story upon the endless water stretching beyond the horizon. Seasons matter little to people living inside great cities, where stone buildings shelter them from nature's constant changes. Here, however, every shift in temperature, every unfamiliar cloud, and every subtle change in the tide becomes part of your daily life. The lighthouse has taught you that the sea is never truly the same twice. Even on mornings that appear perfectly calm, tiny details reveal what lies ahead. A flock of gulls flying inland instead of toward the water often signals approaching rough weather. Dolphins disappearing from familiar waters suggest storms forming far beyond the horizon. Even the smell carried by the wind changes before rain arrives, bringing with it the scent of distant forests, wet earth, or cold northern currents. After years spent alone upon these cliffs, you have learned to notice things that ordinary travelers would never even see. It is almost as though the sea whispers its intentions only to those patient enough to spend years listening. This quiet understanding becomes more valuable than any official training Rome could ever provide. One afternoon, while scanning the distant horizon from the lantern balcony, you notice an unusual vessel approaching from the east. Unlike the broad merchant ships that regularly visit nearby harbors, this one is sleek, narrow, and moves with remarkable speed despite carrying no visible cargo. As it comes closer, the unmistakable crimson sail marked with imperial insignia becomes visible beneath the afternoon sun. It is an official Roman dispatch ship carrying urgent correspondence between provinces. Such vessels rarely stop unless absolutely necessary, yet today the captain unexpectedly signals toward the lighthouse. Curious, you descend the long staircase and make your way to the small stone landing where supply boats usually dock. The captain, an older man whose weathered face tells the story of decades spent crossing dangerous seas, steps ashore carrying a sealed leather pouch. The message inside is not for you but for the regional harbor commander several miles south. Still, protocol requires him to record his arrival inside the lighthouse registry before continuing. As the two of you share a simple meal of bread, olives, and dried fish overlooking the calm water, the captain studies the towering lighthouse with quiet admiration. "I've sailed these waters for nearly 30 years, he says while looking toward the great lantern high above the cliffs. "I've forgotten the names of governors, merchants, and even a few emperors, but I've never forgotten where this light stands." His words linger in your thoughts long after he sails away. History remembers rulers because they changed the empire. Sailors remember lighthouses because they saved their lives. Later that evening, as the sun slowly sinks into the western sea, you notice dozens of fishing boats returning together after several successful days offshore. Their small sails glow orange beneath the fading sunlight while seabirds circle overhead hoping for scraps from the day's catch. Children waiting along the shoreline begin waving excitedly as familiar boats approach the harbor, their laughter faintly reaching the cliffs below your tower. Watching the joyful reunions from such a great height fills you with quiet satisfaction. None of those families realize how often your lighthouse has guided their fathers safely home through darkness and fog. To them, the beacon has become something so dependable that they rarely think about it at all. Yet perhaps that is the greatest compliment any keeper can receive. People trust the light so completely that they no longer fear whether it will be there tomorrow. Reliability, you have learned, is a form of invisible greatness. As night falls once more, you perform the familiar routine with practiced precision. Fresh oil fills the great bronze basin. The enormous wick is carefully trimmed. Soot is polished from every reflective surface, and the first spark quickly grows into a brilliant golden flame that pushes back the surrounding darkness. Standing beside the blazing lantern, you gaze across the moonlit Mediterranean, where countless tiny lights from distant ships flicker gently upon the water like stars reflected beneath the sky. Somewhere among them are merchants carrying fortunes, soldiers returning home after years of service, pilgrims chasing distant dreams, and families hoping simply to reach another sunrise together. None of them know the man tending the fire above the cliffs. None will ever climb the endless staircase or witness the countless hours spent maintaining the lonely tower. Yet every one of them, knowingly or not, places a small part of their trust in the unwavering light that never fails to appear when darkness arrives. You quietly smile to yourself before adding another measure of oil to the steady flame. Tomorrow will almost certainly resemble today. Another sunrise, another climb, another lonely watch above the restless sea. Yet somehow that thought no longer feels repetitive. Instead, it feels meaningful, because every ordinary night inside the lighthouse gives countless strangers the chance to live another ordinary morning of their own. By now, the lighthouse no longer feels like a place where you work. It has become the entire world you know. Weeks blend into months until even the passing of seasons becomes difficult to notice. The only reliable calendar is the sea itself. During the spring, the waters shimmer beneath gentle sunlight while merchant fleets crowd the shipping lanes carrying grain, wine, marble, and olive oil toward the ports of Italy. Summer brings long, brilliant evenings when the horizon remains painted with gold long after the sun has disappeared, allowing ships to travel later into the night before searching for your beacon. Autumn fills the air with colder winds rolling down from the northern mountains, while winter transforms every shift into a battle against rain, freezing spray, and relentless darkness. Through every season, the lighthouse remains exactly where it has always stood, unmoving against the cliffs, while the rest of the world endlessly changes around it. Sometimes you wonder how many keepers climbed these same stone steps before your arrival. Their footprints disappeared centuries ago, yet the staircase remembers them. Every polished handrail, every worn stair, every soot-stained lantern hook carries silent evidence that countless forgotten men lived this same lonely existence long before you were born. They watched the same sunrise, listened to the same waves crashing below, and spent endless nights feeding the same eternal flame. None of their names survive, yet without them thousands of sailors would never have reached home. There is something strangely comforting in realizing you are simply another link in a chain stretching far beyond your own lifetime. One quiet afternoon, while repairing weathered wooden shutters around the lantern chamber, you notice movement far below on the narrow coastal road leading toward the lighthouse. A small group of travelers slowly climbs the winding path. Such visitors are uncommon. Most people admire the lighthouse from passing ships or distant harbors, but rarely make the difficult journey to the isolated cliffs. As they draw closer, you recognize a wealthy Roman merchant accompanied by his wife and young son. Their trading vessel has anchored safely nearby while they wait for favorable winds to continue north. The curious boy cannot stop staring upward at the enormous tower towering above the sea. After politely asking permission, the family climbs the spiral staircase with you toward the lantern chamber. The child races ahead despite the exhausting climb, his excitement growing with every step until he finally reaches the summit. When he sees the vast Mediterranean stretching endlessly beneath the afternoon sky, he falls completely silent. His father laughs softly before explaining that the boy had always imagined someone important must live inside such an incredible building. A famous commander, perhaps, or a great scholar serving the emperor himself. Instead, He found only one ordinary man carrying buckets of oil and cleaning smoke from bronze mirrors. The merchant smiles apologetically, but the child simply watches you with quiet admiration before asking a question no adult has ever thought to ask. Do you ever get lonely up here? For several moments you look across the sea before answering honestly. Sometimes, you reply, but every light has to stand alone if it wants to be seen from far away. The boy nods slowly, not fully understanding your words, yet somehow sensing their meaning. Before leaving, he thanks you with a sincerity that surprises you more than any expensive reward ever could. As the family disappears down the staircase, their voices gradually fading into the distance, you realize that this brief visit has brought something rare into the tower: laughter. For the first time in many months, the lighthouse no longer felt entirely isolated. That evening, as darkness settles over the Mediterranean once again, you light the great beacon with the same practiced care as always. Yet tonight your thoughts return not to storms or merchant ships, but to the young boy's question. Loneliness is an unavoidable companion for every lighthouse keeper. Entire weeks can pass without meaningful conversation. Some nights the only voices you hear belong to gulls circling above the cliffs or the distant cries of sailors carried faintly across the water by favorable winds. There are evenings when the silence grows so complete that even the crackling fire beside you sounds impossibly loud. Yet over time you discover that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Solitude allows you to hear things others overlook: the changing rhythm of the waves, the direction of the wind before a storm, the distant creak of a ship struggling beyond the horizon, and even your own thoughts, which become clearer with every passing season. The lighthouse teaches patience in a way no teacher ever could. It teaches that not every meaningful life must be filled with constant noise. Looking across the moonlit sea, you notice dozens of ships moving safely between distant ports, each guided in some small way by the light burning beside you. Somewhere aboard those vessels, fathers are telling stories to their sons. Merchants are planning tomorrow's markets. Sailors are dreaming of home, and children are sleeping peacefully below deck without ever realizing that one lonely flame upon a distant cliff quietly watches over them all. You gently add another measure of oil to the lantern, watching the golden light grow brighter against the endless darkness. Perhaps no one will ever remember the keeper who tended this fire. Perhaps history will record only the lighthouse itself. But standing alone beneath a sky filled with countless stars reflected upon the sea below, you begin understanding that some lives were never meant to stand at the center of history. Some were simply meant to make sure others found their way safely through the night. Years have now passed since you first climbed the winding staircase of the lighthouse, carrying nothing more than nervous determination and a heavy jar of olive oil. The young man who once counted every lonely hour has quietly disappeared, replaced by someone whose heartbeat now seems to move with the rhythm of the sea itself. You no longer wake because of habit. You wake because the changing wind outside your window tells you exactly when dawn is approaching. Before the first gull circles above the cliffs, before fishermen untie their boats from weathered wooden docks, and before the eastern horizon begins glowing with pale silver light, you are already standing upon the balcony overlooking the endless Mediterranean. Every morning begins with the same slow inspection. You study the horizon carefully, searching not only for approaching ships but also for anything unusual hidden among the waves. Floating wreckage, unfamiliar sails, strangely behaving seabirds, even distant smoke rising above the water can reveal stories unfolding far beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. Most people spend their lives looking at the sea. You have spent years learning how to read it. Every ripple, every current, Every shift in color has become another sentence in a language only patient observers ever understand. Some mornings the water reflects the sky so perfectly that the entire world seems suspended between two endless oceans of blue. Other days, thick gray clouds erase the horizon completely, making it impossible to tell where heaven ends and the sea begins. Yet, regardless of the weather, your responsibilities never change. The lantern must be cleaned. Fresh oil must be carried upward. The bronze mirrors must shine brightly enough to send their light farther than the eye itself can see. Even after so many years, there has never been a morning when these duties felt unimportant. One quiet afternoon, while repairing loose stones along the narrow path leading toward the lighthouse, you notice a group of Roman soldiers approaching from the coastal road below. At first you assume they are simply passing through, but as they continue climbing toward the tower, it becomes clear they have come specifically to visit you. Their commander, a middle-aged centurion with weathered armor marked by years of service, respectfully introduces himself before explaining that several military transport ships are expected to arrive after sunset carrying reinforcements bound for distant frontier provinces. Intelligence reports suggest that pirates have recently become unusually active along nearby shipping routes. The soldiers will remain near the lighthouse throughout the night, using the tower as both a lookout and signaling position should hostile vessels appear offshore. It is the first time in many months that your lonely watch will be shared with others. As evening approaches, campfires begin flickering beneath the cliffs, while legionaries quietly prepare their equipment beside the ancient road. Their disciplined movements remind you that although your professions differ greatly, your responsibilities are surprisingly similar. They guard Rome from enemies upon land. You guard it from danger upon the sea. When darkness finally falls and the great beacon rises above the coastline once again, several soldiers climb the tower to observe the surrounding waters from its highest balcony. Standing together beneath countless stars, conversation gradually shifts away from military campaigns and politics towards simpler subjects. One veteran quietly admits that during difficult voyages, he often searched for this very lighthouse, feeling relief the moment its familiar light appeared beyond the darkness. Another explains that years earlier his transport ship survived a violent storm only because the captain recognized the beacon before reaching hidden reefs. Listening to their stories, you realize that even hardened legionaries speak about the lighthouse with something approaching gratitude. To sailors, it represents safety. To soldiers, it represents home drawing nearer. To merchants, it represents another successful voyage. One simple flame means something different to every traveler who sees it. Shortly after midnight, however, the peaceful conversation ends abruptly. One of the soldiers points toward the western horizon where several faint lights appear moving unusually close together. They are too small to be merchant vessels and far too fast to be fishing boats. The centurion immediately narrows his eyes before quietly giving orders to his men. Pirate ships. Even from this distance, their intentions seem obvious. They are moving without signal fires, hugging the darker waters where ordinary captains would never risk sailing at night. The soldiers quickly prepare warning beacons while you concentrate entirely upon strengthening the lighthouse flame. More oil is poured into the basin. The enormous wick burns brighter than ever before until the lantern glows like a second moon above the cliffs. Moments later, the soldiers ignite signal fires arranged carefully along the coastline. One after another, distant watchtowers farther inland answer with their own flames, creating a chain of light stretching across the night. Somewhere many miles away, Roman patrol ships will soon recognize the warning. The pirates almost certainly see it as well. For nearly an hour, the mysterious vessels continue drifting cautiously along the horizon before finally altering course and disappearing back into deeper water. No battle takes place. No arrows are fired. No swords leave their scabbards. The mere presence of coordinated Roman signals proves enough to discourage an attack. As silence gradually returns to the sea, the centurion smiles before placing a hand upon the cold stone wall beside the lantern. Most victories, he says quietly, are won before anyone realizes a battle almost happened. His words linger in your thoughts long after the soldiers descend the staircase before dawn. By sunrise, the legionaries continue their journey toward the harbor, leaving the lighthouse exactly as they found it. Quiet, lonely, and faithfully standing above the sea. Watching their small column disappear into the distance, you once again find yourself alone with the endless waves and the steady cry of seabirds circling overhead. Yet the tower feels different somehow. Last night reminded you that the lighthouse protects more than wandering merchant ships. It protects soldiers, fishermen, entire coastal towns, and perhaps even the fragile peace that allows ordinary people to sleep without fear. As the morning sun climbs above the Mediterranean, its warm light slowly replaces the fading glow of the great lantern. You extinguish the fire with practiced care before beginning the familiar task of cleaning soot from the bronze mirrors. Tomorrow night you will light it again, just as every keeper before you has done for generations. The sea will remain unpredictable. Ships will continue crossing distant horizons. Storms will return. New travelers will search for the beacon without ever knowing the man tending it. And high above the cliffs, where the wind never truly rests, another quiet day in the life of a Roman lighthouse keeper begins exactly as the last one ended, with duty, solitude, and a light that refuses to disappear. The older you become, the more the lighthouse begins to resemble a living companion rather than a building of stone. Every crack in its ancient walls tells a story you remember. Every weathered stair beneath your feet has carried you through countless nights of wind and rain. The bronze lantern above has become so familiar that you can almost hear when the flame is burning correctly simply by listening to its gentle roar echoing through the circular chamber. Even the endless climb no longer feels tiring. Your body has learned every turn of the spiral staircase so completely that you sometimes reach the summit without remembering the climb itself. Outside, another peaceful summer evening settles across the Mediterranean. Warm orange light spreads across the water while fishing boats slowly return toward nearby villages, their crews laughing after another successful day at sea. The horizon appears perfectly calm, the kind of evening that convinces inexperienced sailors the sea has finally become harmless. You know better. Calm water has often hidden the greatest dangers. The Mediterranean has taught you never to trust appearances alone. Long experience has replaced fear with respect, and respect has become your greatest source of wisdom. During the afternoon, an elderly fisherman climbs the steep path leading toward the lighthouse carrying a woven basket covered with linen cloth. His face is deeply lined by decades beneath the sun, and his hands are rough from a lifetime spent pulling heavy nets through saltwater. You recognize him immediately. For years, his small fishing boat has been among the first vessels to leave the harbor before dawn and among the last to return each evening. Without saying much, he places the basket upon the wooden table inside the lower room of the lighthouse. Fresh bread, olives, dried figs, smoked fish, and a small clay jug of wine. You thank him, assuming he simply wishes to trade supplies as many fishermen occasionally do. But instead he quietly smiles and shakes his head. "No payment," he says. "My grandson asked me to bring this." Curious, you ask why. The old fisherman slowly walks toward the open doorway overlooking the sea before answering. A few winters ago, during the worst storm I've ever seen, my son was still out there. He points toward the distant water where gentle waves now shimmer beneath the afternoon sun. Everyone in the village believed he was gone. My grandson stood beside me all night watching your light. He kept saying, "As long as the lighthouse is still burning, Father will find his way home." And he did. The old man falls silent for a moment before looking back toward you. The boy says your fire saved his family. Before you can respond, the fisherman simply nods once, lifts his empty basket, and quietly begins walking back down the cliff path toward the village below. You stand watching him until he disappears among the olive trees, realizing that the gratitude you have searched for all these years had quietly existed all along, spoken not through official rewards or public ceremonies, but through simple acts of kindness. That evening, after lighting the great beacon as darkness slowly blankets the coastline, your thoughts remain fixed upon the fisherman and his grandson. Throughout your years as keeper, you had often imagined the ships crossing the horizon, yet you rarely thought about the people waiting for them on land. Every vessel approaching the harbor carries more than cargo. Somewhere aboard is someone's father, mother, husband, daughter, brother, or child. Every safe arrival means another family reunited after weeks or months apart. Every light you maintain reaches far beyond the sailors themselves. It stretches into homes, marketplaces, farms, workshops, and villages where loved ones wait patiently beside the shoreline, hoping to recognize familiar sails before sunset. You begin seeing the lighthouse differently. It no longer stands merely between ships and dangerous rocks. It stands between hope and despair, between reunion and grief, between another ordinary evening shared around a family table and a lifetime of wondering what became of those lost beyond the horizon. Such thoughts make the lonely tower feel strangely warmer despite the cool night wind surrounding it. Near midnight, an unusual sound drifts upward from the sea below. At first it blends with the endless rhythm of crashing waves, but gradually you recognize it as singing. Soft voices carried by the wind. Leaning over the stone balcony, you notice several small fishing boats anchored safely inside a sheltered cove beneath the cliffs. Unable to continue home until the morning tide changes, the fishermen have gathered together upon their boats, sharing food while singing old songs passed from one generation to the next. Their voices rise gently through the darkness, sometimes carried clearly by the wind before fading once more into the night. From the top of the lighthouse you cannot understand every word, yet the melodies themselves speak of long voyages, waiting families, calm seas, lost friends, and safe harbors. You realize that although your life often feels isolated, you are never truly separated from the people below. Every evening they glance toward your light before resting. Every morning they look up once more before sailing out again. An invisible bond exists between the lonely keeper above the cliffs and the countless ordinary people living beneath them. As the hours slowly pass, the songs below eventually disappear one by one until only the steady crackling of the great lantern remains. The stars seem unusually bright tonight, reflected perfectly across the calm Mediterranean, so that sea and sky become almost indistinguishable. Standing alone beside the golden flame, you suddenly understand something that had taken years to reveal itself. The lighthouse is not remembered because it is the tallest structure upon the coast. It is remembered because it never fails. Night after night, season after season, generation after generation, it continues doing exactly what it was built to do regardless of storms, loneliness, or time itself. Perhaps people are not remembered for the greatness of extraordinary moments, but for the quiet consistency of ordinary ones repeated faithfully over an entire lifetime. You gently refill the oil basin once more, watching the flame grow stronger against the endless darkness. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another ship has already spotted the familiar beacon and adjusted its course towards safety. Somewhere in a nearby village, another family sleeps peacefully because they know the light still burns. And high above the silent cliffs, where the wind whispers through ancient stone and the sea stretches endlessly beneath the stars, you continue your watch with the same quiet devotion that has guided countless strangers home for years, knowing that tomorrow night, and every night after that, the light will rise once again. As another year quietly passes, you begin noticing changes that have nothing to do with the lighthouse and everything to do with yourself. The tower still stands as proudly as the day you first arrived. The waves still break against the cliffs with the same relentless rhythm. Merchant ships continue appearing beyond the horizon every morning before vanishing again into the distance by evening. Yet, when you catch your reflection in the polished bronze mirrors surrounding the lantern, the young keeper who once climbed these endless stairs with uncertain determination has disappeared. Fine lines now surround your eyes, your beard has begun filling with strands of gray, and the countless nights spent beneath salty winds have left your skin weathered like the stones of the lighthouse itself. Time moves differently upon the coast. In Rome, years are measured by new emperors, triumphal parades, and crowded festivals. Here, time is measured by storms survived, lanterns repaired, ships guided home, and winters endured. You cannot remember exactly how many thousands of times you have climbed the spiral staircase carrying heavy jars of olive oil. The steps have become part of your body, and your body has become part of the tower. Sometimes you wonder whether, after enough years, the lighthouse itself begins remembering its keeper just as the keeper remembers every stone within its walls. One clear autumn afternoon, while scanning the horizon from the lantern balcony, you notice something unusual approaching from the south. At first it appears to be another ordinary merchant vessel, but as it draws closer, you recognize the unmistakable crimson banners of an imperial delegation. The ship anchors safely below the cliffs before several officials begin climbing the steep path leading toward the lighthouse. Such visits are exceedingly rare. Most administrators are content reading reports from comfortable offices far from the sea, leaving lonely towers to those who quietly maintain them. The senior official, dressed in an elegant white toga bordered with purple, introduces himself as an inspector appointed to examine several important coastal lighthouses throughout the province. He spends hours carefully recording measurements, inspecting stonework, examining lantern mechanisms, checking supply inventories, and reviewing maintenance records preserved inside weathered wooden chests. His assistants measure everything with remarkable precision, speaking constantly about budgets, repairs, shipping routes, and imperial logistics. Throughout the inspection you answer every question politely, though you quietly suspect that none of these men truly understand what life inside the lighthouse actually feels like after the ships disappear and darkness falls. Before leaving, however, the inspector unexpectedly pauses beside the lantern. He looks toward the endless sea before speaking almost to himself. "I've inspected many towers," he says softly, "but this one feels lived in." You smile faintly. Numbers can measure stone. Records can count supplies. Yet no report can describe the countless lonely nights, whispered prayers during storms, or silent relief felt every dawn when another ship safely reaches harbor. As the delegation departs, you realize that although they came searching for information about the lighthouse, they will leave knowing almost nothing about the man who kept its light alive. That evening, the Mediterranean lies unusually calm beneath a sky overflowing with stars. Without clouds to dim the heavens, thousands of tiny lights seem to stretch endlessly above the sea, mirroring the countless reflections shimmering across the water below. Standing beside the blazing lantern, you suddenly become aware of how small both you and the lighthouse truly are within such an immense world. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Rome continues thriving with crowded streets and magnificent temples. Farther still, armies guard distant frontiers while merchants cross deserts, governors issue decrees, and emperors shape history with decisions made inside marble halls. None of those places can be seen from the lighthouse, yet somehow all of them remain connected by the same sea spreading silently beneath your feet. Every ship passing your tower carries more than cargo. Some transport grain feeding hundreds of thousands of citizens. Others carry letters changing political alliances, physicians bringing medicines to distant provinces, craftsmen transporting rare materials, or families beginning entirely new lives across unfamiliar shores. Watching those tiny silhouettes drifting beneath the stars, you understand that the lighthouse has never merely protected ships. It has quietly protected the countless stories carried aboard them. Every safe voyage allows another chapter of someone's life to continue. Every disaster avoided means another child grows up with a parent. Another merchant fulfills a promise. Another soldier embraces his family after years away from home. Such thoughts make your own quiet existence feel unexpectedly meaningful. Near midnight, while walking the narrow stone balcony surrounding the lantern, you notice a familiar shape emerging slowly from the darkness below. It is the same elderly fisherman who once brought food to the lighthouse after his grandson insisted upon thanking the keeper. This time he has not come alone. Beside him walks a young man, perhaps 15 or 16 years old, carrying a neatly wrapped bundle beneath his arm. As they finally reach the top of the tower, the fisherman introduces him proudly. It is the grandson who had spent years watching the lighthouse from the village below. Without saying much, the young man carefully unwraps the bundle to reveal a beautifully carved wooden model of the lighthouse, crafted by his own hands over many months. Every tiny window, every stone block, every staircase, and even the great bronze lantern has been recreated with astonishing detail. You stand speechless as he quietly places it upon the wooden table. "When I was little," he says with shy honesty, "I wanted to become a soldier, then I wanted to become a sailor. But after watching your light every night, I decided I wanted to build things people could depend on." His grandfather smiles proudly while placing a hand upon the boy's shoulder. In that single moment, you realize your greatest legacy may never be the thousands of ships guided safely home. It may instead be inspiring one ordinary child to believe that quiet service can be just as honorable as glory. Long after the fisherman and his grandson disappear down the winding path beneath the moonlight, the little wooden lighthouse remains resting beside the lantern. Looking at it while the real beacon burns steadily above the cliffs, you understand something that had taken nearly a lifetime to discover. A lighthouse does more than illuminate the sea. It quietly teaches everyone who sees it that even one steady light, faithfully kept through every storm and every lonely night, can guide countless lives without ever asking to be remembered. The 10th winter of your service arrives more quietly than any before it. There is no grand realization announcing that another decade has passed, no ceremony honoring your years upon the lonely cliffs, and no official record celebrating the countless nights during which your lighthouse protected ships from disaster. Instead, the season arrives the same way every winter always has, with colder winds sweeping across the Mediterranean, heavier clouds gathering over the sea, and mornings that remain wrapped in darkness long after you have already begun your work. Yet something inside you has changed. You no longer count the nights spent alone because solitude has become as familiar as the sound of waves striking the rocks below. Every movement now happens almost without thought. Before dawn you climb the endless spiral staircase carrying fresh oil, your hands instinctively finding the smooth places worn into the ancient railing by generations of keepers before you. The bronze lantern is cleaned before the first ray of sunlight reaches the horizon. Every polished reflector gleams once more like gold, and the heavy wick is carefully trimmed with the same patience that only thousands of repetitions can teach. Looking around the lantern chamber, you realize you could probably perform every task blindfolded. The lighthouse has become part of you, just as you have quietly become part of the lighthouse itself. Sometimes you wonder whether future keepers will notice the tiny repairs you have made over the years. The stone you carefully replaced after the great storm, the iron hinge you forged by hand during a harsh winter, the wooden beam you strengthened after discovering hidden rot beneath the roof. They may never know who made those repairs, but they will unknowingly depend upon them every single night. One cold afternoon, while gathering driftwood that has washed ashore after several days of rough weather, you discover something unexpected half buried beneath wet sand near the base of the cliffs. At first it appears to be nothing more than another damaged crate carried inland by the tide. But as you brush away layers of seaweed and broken shells, you uncover a beautifully carved wooden figurehead from the bow of a merchant ship. The sculpture depicts Neptune, ruler of the seas, though years beneath salt water have softened many of its once proud details. One arm is broken away. Patches of faded blue paint still cling stubbornly to the wood, and deep cracks run across its weathered face. Even so, there remains something strangely noble about it. You carefully carry the heavy carving back to the lighthouse, placing it near the entrance where it can dry beside the warmth of the stone fireplace. During the following evenings, whenever your duties allow, you slowly begin restoring the forgotten figure. You sand away rough edges, seal widening cracks with fresh resin, replace missing sections using driftwood collected from the shore, and carefully polish every surviving detail until Neptune's face gradually emerges once again from beneath years of neglect. The work is slow, peaceful, and unlike anything your ordinary responsibilities require. For the first time in years, your hands create something rather than simply maintaining it. While repairing the figurehead, you cannot help wondering about the ship from which it came. Did it sink during one terrible storm many years ago? Did its crew survive? Was the captain standing proudly beneath this very carving when the vessel first left harbor filled with hope? The sea rarely answers such questions. It simply carries memories from one generation to another before returning them unexpectedly to those patient enough to listen. As spring approaches, the restored figurehead now stands proudly outside the lighthouse entrance facing the endless Mediterranean. Passing fishermen begin recognizing it immediately. Some smile politely while climbing the cliff path to exchange news. Others quietly touch the wooden carving before beginning another voyage, believing it might bring good fortune upon the sea. You never encourage such superstitions, yet neither do you dismiss them. After all, sailors spend their lives trusting things they cannot fully explain. Changing winds, lucky stars, familiar currents, and lonely lights shining through darkness. Hope itself has always been an invisible companion upon the water. One evening, a young merchant captain visiting the lighthouse notices the restored Neptune and asks where it came from. After hearing the story, he laughs softly before saying, "Perhaps the sea returned it because it knew no one else would care enough to mend it." His words linger in your thoughts throughout the night. Perhaps that is exactly what your own life has become. The empire builds magnificent monuments, celebrates victorious generals, and records the achievements of emperors upon marble tablets meant to last forever. Yet there are countless smaller things. Forgotten towers, abandoned roads, weathered harbors, broken figureheads, and lonely flames that survive only because ordinary people quietly choose to care for them long after everyone else has forgotten. The realization fills you with unexpected peace. Greatness is not always found in creating something new. Sometimes it is found in preserving what already exists so others may continue depending upon it. Late that night, after the beacon has once again been lit and the sea stretches endlessly beneath a sky overflowing with stars, you step onto the narrow balcony circling the lantern chamber. Far beyond the horizon, tiny lights from distant merchant ships flicker gently against the darkness like drifting constellations upon the water. Somewhere aboard those vessels, children sleep safely below deck while their parents trust the familiar lighthouse to guide them through the night. Somewhere elderly sailors point toward your beacon while telling younger crewmen stories about storms survived because that light never disappeared. Somewhere another child standing beside a quiet harbor waits for a father's ship to emerge from darkness, comforted simply by knowing the lighthouse still burns above the cliffs. You rest one hand upon the cold stone wall beside the lantern and look down toward the restored figurehead standing silently at the tower's entrance. Both of you have survived years of wind, salt, storms, and solitude. Both continue standing despite everything the sea has tried to take away. As the great flame beside you burns steadily against the night, you realize that neither stone nor wood truly lasts forever. One day the lighthouse will need another keeper. One day even these ancient walls may finally surrender to time. But until that distant day arrives, your duty remains beautifully simple. Keep the light alive. Keep the sea watched. Keep hope visible. And somewhere beyond the darkness, another ship will quietly turn toward home. The years pass so quietly that one morning you suddenly realize you can no longer remember exactly how long you have lived inside the lighthouse. Somewhere along the way, the seasons stopped feeling like separate chapters and became one continuous cycle of sunrise, maintenance, sunset, and firelight. Your hands have grown rough from decades of hauling heavy oil jars. Your shoulders have become permanently bent from carrying bundles of firewood up the endless spiral staircase, and your once dark beard is now almost completely silver. Yet despite the passing years, the lighthouse itself remains remarkably unchanged. The same waves continue crashing against the cliffs below with patient determination. The same sea birds circle above the tower every morning searching for fish in the shallow waters near the rocks. Merchant ships still appear as tiny white sails upon the distant horizon before gradually growing larger as they approach the harbor. Even the smell carried by the sea breeze remains familiar, a mixture of salt, wet stone, burning oil, and drifting pine forests farther inland. You often wonder whether the lighthouse has preserved you just as much as you have preserved it. Had you lived in Rome, surrounded by politics, commerce, and endless noise, perhaps you would have become a completely different man. Here, above the restless Mediterranean, life has been reduced to its simplest and purest form. Every day asks only one question: will the light burn tonight? If the answer is yes, then everything else somehow feels less important. One cool spring morning, a small government vessel anchors beneath the cliffs carrying several officials accompanied by a much younger man dressed in the simple traveling clothes of a laborer rather than an administrator. As they climb toward the tower, you immediately understand why they have come long before anyone speaks a single word. The Empire has finally sent your replacement. The realization arrives without sadness or surprise. If anything, it feels inevitable, like the changing of the tides or the arrival of winter storms. The young man introduces himself politely, though nervousness is obvious in every movement. His eyes constantly wander upward toward the towering lantern chamber, while he quietly admits he has never lived beside the sea before. The officials complete their formal inspection with the same efficiency you have witnessed many times over the years before eventually leaving the two of you alone inside the lighthouse. From that day forward, your responsibilities quietly begin changing. Instead of climbing every staircase alone, another pair of footsteps now echoes beside yours. Instead of carrying every oil jar yourself, another pair of hands lifts half the weight. You begin teaching him everything official records never mention. You show him how to judge approaching weather simply by watching seabirds change direction before sunrise. You explain why lantern windows must never be cleaned immediately after extinguishing the flame because sudden cooling can crack the ancient glass. You teach him which wines carry harmless rain and which hide dangerous storms beyond the horizon. Most importantly, you explain that sailors trust consistency more than brilliance. A beacon does not need to be extraordinary. It simply needs to appear every single night without fail. The young keeper listens carefully, asking thoughtful questions while absorbing every lesson with quiet determination. Watching him reminds you of yourself many years ago, climbing these same stairs filled with uncertainty and wondering whether you would ever truly belong inside such a lonely place. Weeks slowly become months as teacher and apprentice settle into a peaceful routine. Each evening you still climb together toward the lantern chamber, though now you intentionally allow the younger keeper to complete more of the work himself. He trims the enormous wick with increasing confidence. He carefully polishes the bronze reflectors until they shine like mirrors beneath the setting sun. He learns exactly how much olive oil the Great Basin consumes during calm nights and how much extra must always remain available before storms. Occasionally he makes small mistakes, allowing smoke to gather too heavily inside the lantern chamber or forgetting to inspect tiny cracks around the windows after violent winds. Rather than correcting him immediately, you quietly allow experience to become his greatest teacher, just as the sea once taught you lessons no instructor ever could. One evening, after successfully guiding several merchant ships safely through thick coastal fog, the young keeper smiles with genuine pride. You recognize that expression instantly because you wore it yourself decades earlier. It is not pride in personal achievement, but satisfaction in knowing strangers reached home safely because one small responsibility was fulfilled without failure. That night, while sharing a simple meal beside the fireplace below the tower, he finally asks the question he has clearly been carrying for weeks. Were you never tempted to leave? For a long moment you stare into the dancing fire before answering. Many times, you admit quietly, especially during the early years. You pause before looking toward the narrow staircase disappearing upward into darkness. But eventually I realized something. Most people spend their lives searching for where they belong. I was fortunate enough to find it. The young keeper says nothing further. He simply nods while glancing toward the lighthouse towering above both of you. As summer arrives once more, you find yourself spending longer periods sitting upon the stone bench overlooking the sea, while the younger keeper manages the nightly duties almost entirely on his own. Watching him move confidently through the lantern chamber fills you not with regret but with quiet satisfaction. The flame burns just as brightly as ever. Ships continue arriving safely. The lighthouse has not changed because its purpose was never tied to one man alone. It belongs to every keeper willing to dedicate his life to an unseen responsibility greater than himself. One golden evening, as the sun slowly disappears beneath the endless Mediterranean, and the familiar beacon rises into the growing darkness exactly on time. You realize something that had escaped you for many years. You never truly kept the lighthouse alive. The lighthouse kept something alive inside you. It gave meaning to ordinary days, purpose to lonely nights, and quiet dignity to a life that history would almost certainly overlook. Standing beside the young keeper while the great flame sends its golden light across the sea once again, you smile gently as countless distant ships begin adjusting their course toward home. None of those sailors know that a new guardian now tends the beacon above the cliffs. They simply see the same faithful light shining exactly where it has always been. And perhaps that is how it should be. The greatest lighthouse keeper is not remembered because the light changed after he arrived. He is remembered because no one ever noticed it change at all. The final autumn of your life arrives almost unnoticed, just as every season has since the day you first climbed the lighthouse steps so many years ago. The sea still stretches endlessly toward the horizon, unchanged by the countless generations that have come and gone along its shores. The cliffs remain strong beneath the ancient tower, weathered by storms beyond counting yet still standing proudly above the restless Mediterranean. Every morning the gulls circle overhead before fishermen launch their boats into familiar waters, and every evening the setting sun turns the sea into a river of molten gold before slowly surrendering to the quiet darkness. Only you have truly changed. Your steps are slower now, your hands tremble slightly when lifting the heavy oil jars, and climbing the spiral staircase requires a few moments of rest where once you never paused at all. Yet strangely, none of this saddens you. Time has taken your strength, but it has also replaced youthful ambition with something far gentler: contentment. Looking back across the decades, you realize your life was never filled with glorious victories, celebrated speeches, or statues carved in your honor. Instead, it was built from thousands of ordinary evenings that all looked almost exactly alike. One more lantern cleaned, one more wick trimmed, one more fire lit before darkness settled across the sea. One more ship quietly guided home. Those simple moments, repeated faithfully over an entire lifetime, became something far greater than you ever understood while living them. The lighthouse never demanded greatness. It only asked for consistency, and perhaps consistency is one of the rarest forms of greatness a person can ever achieve. One calm evening, after the younger keeper has already completed most of the preparations for the night's watch, you slowly climb the staircase one final time. Every stone beneath your feet feels familiar enough that you no longer need to look where you step. Reaching the lantern chamber, you pause beside the great bronze beacon while the younger man carefully lights the enormous wick. The golden flame slowly grows brighter until it once again shines proudly across the darkening Mediterranean exactly as it has every night for generations. Neither of you speaks for several minutes. Words somehow feel unnecessary. Together you step onto the narrow balcony circling the top of the lighthouse. The sea below is perfectly calm, reflecting countless stars until the boundary between heaven and water almost disappears. Far beyond the horizon, tiny merchant ships continue their endless journeys, each quietly altering course the moment they recognize the familiar beacon standing above the cliffs. Watching those distant lights, you suddenly realize that not one sailor aboard those vessels knows your name. They never needed to. They trusted the light, not the man tending it. At first, that truth had once seemed lonely. Now it feels strangely beautiful. The greatest acts of service are often performed by people whose names history never records. Bridges are remembered long after their builders are forgotten. Roads outlive those who laid their stones. Wells continue giving water centuries after the hands that dug them have turned to dust. The lighthouse belongs to that same quiet tradition. Its purpose has never been to glorify the keeper. Its purpose has always been to ensure others safely continue their journeys. As midnight approaches, the younger keeper quietly asks whether you regret anything. You smile gently before answering. You tell him that when you first arrived, you believed a meaningful life had to be filled with adventure. You imagined distant cities, crowded forums, military campaigns, and glorious accomplishments remembered for generations. Yet after spending most of your life upon these lonely cliffs, you discovered something far more valuable. Meaning is rarely found in extraordinary moments. More often it is hidden inside ordinary responsibilities accepted willingly and repeated faithfully day after day. You explain that every family reunited because a ship found the harbor, every sailor who survived another crossing, every child who watched a parent return safely home because the lighthouse never failed. All of those unseen moments became your true legacy. The younger keeper listens silently, understanding perhaps more than you realize. Before dawn begins to brighten the eastern horizon, you gently place one weathered hand upon the ancient stone wall beside the lantern. It feels warm from the fire burning within, just as it did on your very first night decades ago. Closing your eyes for a brief moment, you listen to the familiar sounds that have accompanied nearly your entire life. The steady crackling of the great flame, the whisper of sea wind passing through the tower, the distant rhythm of waves meeting stone, and somewhere far below, the faint creak of a merchant ship continuing safely toward harbor. The world has changed countless times around this lonely lighthouse, yet these sounds remain timeless. When the first light of dawn finally begins replacing the stars, you watch the younger keeper extinguish the beacon with calm confidence before immediately beginning the familiar work of cleaning soot from the polished bronze mirrors. Without needing instruction, he prepares fresh oil for the coming evening, inspects every window, checks every rope and hinge, and quietly begins another ordinary day exactly as you once did. Standing nearby, you realize the lighthouse no longer needs you. That knowledge does not bring sorrow, it brings peace. The light will continue shining long after your own watch has ended. Sailors not yet born will someday search this coastline and feel the same relief countless others have felt before them. Children will grow into old men remembering the comforting glow above the cliffs. New keepers will climb these endless stairs carrying heavy jars of oil, believing themselves alone, never realizing they walk beside the quiet footsteps of everyone who came before. As the morning sun rises above the Mediterranean one final time, its golden light slowly washes across the ancient tower, the endless sea, and the weathered cliffs that have witnessed your entire life's work. You take one last long look toward the horizon where sky and water meet in perfect silence. Somewhere beyond that endless blue, history will continue writing the stories of emperors, armies, and kingdoms. Here upon the cliffs, however, another story has quietly reached its end. Not the story of a famous man, but of one ordinary lighthouse keeper whose steady flame illuminated thousands of unseen journeys, proving that sometimes the brightest light in history belongs to the person no one ever notices, because they never once allowed the darkness to win.